Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much. I want to talk a little more about High Score, the video game documentary on Netflix. It's divided into 6 parts, covers several different areas of gaming, and it's not a broad overview of video games like maybe Video Games the movie, where it just, covers the entire history in a linear fashion. It's not that at all. It goes through and covers specific aspects of games. Now, I've seen some complaints saying, it doesn't cover enough of the really early history of video games like Ralph Baer, the Magnavox Odyssey, Pong, Steve Russell, Computer Space, all that really early gaming stuff. Well, it's not the intent of High Score thus far. There's 6 parts. Hopefully there'll be 6 more parts and on and on. Hopefully there will be different seasons, I guess you would call it that, of this. But so far, it just covers specific aspects of video game history, just some of the more interesting aspects, like fighting games, like console wars, like Nintendo, like Sega, and on and on. But there's been quite a few complaints that it doesn't cover broad enough history. I don't think that's a problem at all. I like that it goes through and covers specific aspects of video games because I just think it works well for the format. It's nicely produced. Sure, there are certain problems with it. Every once in a while they get something wrong, but there's some really great interviews with Japanese developers and with movers and shakers of the 90s like Trip Hawkins and Tom Kalinske. I think it's an interesting series. But one specific complaint I've seen is that it's too gay. I'll just put it that way. I just sort of shorten it to that, or that it's too representative. There's too much inclusion, too much diversity, forced on the viewer, that kind of thing. Too much social justice warrioring and that kind of thing. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think the inclusive nature of it has been very interesting, and I don't think it's out of place. I don't think it's shoehorned in. I don't think it's just random or meeting some quota. I think it actually fits very well with the series. Now, here are 2 complaints I've seen specifically. Now, the reason I bring this up is because on Facebook, I've seen people complaining that it has too much of an agenda. As a matter of fact, so I'm going to read a couple of quotes, a couple of comments from the Nintendo Over 30s Club group on Facebook. One guy says, just talking about High Score, I learned some new stuff, but I was disappointed in the fact that it had an agenda. Now, this was a more polite way of saying it, more polite than the next guy. He says, I like it, but damn Netflix, always pushing some LGBT liberal BS on their originals. I'm just tired. Yeah, everyone has a voice. Okay, you're happy being gay. You don't have to prove it to me. Your lifestyle doesn't bother me or most people. Be you and enjoy your life. Sorry for the rant. I just felt like they spend more time on the gay stories than they needed it to. Now, I find this ironic because a big part, one of the complaints of High Score is that they cover too much familiar ground, things that we already know about video game history. A lot of us hardcore gamers or history buffs already know. Now, the series was probably made with a mainstream audience in mind since it's Netflix, so a lot of people are hearing about this stuff for the first time, like the Fairchild Channel F console. A lot of the comments, even on Facebook video game groups, had never heard of the Fairchild Channel F, and I thought that was pretty neat that it spotlighted a relatively obscure console. But a lot of us got, people that are into this big time, into retro gaming, obviously know what that is. But the ironic part of it is they talk about how the series covered familiar ground, but some of these, stories from gay people, transgender people, are new to a lot of people, even video game historians. And there's a couple I want to mention that I found very interesting. Rebecca Heineman participated and won the Space Invaders tournament in 1980, really early video game tournament. And she talks about how video games allowed her to be herself, allowed her to play as a female with us in this world. Growing up, she was Bill Heineman, never felt comfortable as a male, always felt like a female. And within video games, she says in these virtual worlds were the only place she could find solace and peace. So those of you who value video games and think they are important in our culture should see the value in that. Here was a person, decades ago who felt lonely and lost and sort of just not able to express herself as a female, And, you know, in the 80s, you just could not come out as gay or transgender and be accepted anywhere close to you could. I mean, it was a scandal. It was a pejorative to be gay. It was considered, you know, just awful or deranged, much more so among most people than now, where it's, you know, much more accepted, and people can be out, and people can be accepted in society. People had to live for, you know, for decades. These stories of, you know, gay and LGBT folks just haven't been covered enough in the gaming world. And I'm perfectly fine with High Score tackling these topics. And, you know, what better way to talk about the value of video games, someone like Rebecca Heineman, who could play these games and just really feel like she could be herself. Just awesome. And another one, Gordon Bellamy. He was black and gay. He mentions, you know, that you obviously see that he's black, obviously, but he's a gay man, and he's talking about playing Madden football and just what an awesome game that was to him. And within that game, you know, it didn't matter, you know, his ability, you know, on a real football field or who he was just immersed in this game. And within this game, it didn't matter who you were. Everybody had an equal playing field, so to speak. And so that meant a lot to him. Madden was a super important game to him growing up, and that's awesome. And he actually ended up working for Electronic Arts later, and being one of the programmers of Madden football, and even introduced black players on the field, which is awesome. You know, with the advanced hardware, the 16-bit hardware, you could have multiracial players, you know, more than just one race of players, you know, with the advanced processing power. And he talked about how important that was to him. I wasn't familiar with his story, so I think that's great. So yeah, High Score does cover some familiar ground that we all know. And ironically, the complaints about, you know, some of the LGBTQ stuff, some of us are learning for the first time. So I think that's just ironic and sort of wrong-headed. And I like that High Score is covering some of this stuff. I think it's neat. Now, I did have some complaints about High Score. High Score can't be all things to all people. It can't cover every aspect of gaming history within 6 episodes, and I'm fine with that. But when they do cover a topic, like say they covered Atari and the creation of Nolan Bushnell, they call Nolan Bushnell the creator of Atari. They should have said co-creator with Ted Dabney, since they do cover that. And since they do cover role-playing games, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, which began in 1974, you know, actual pen and paper, pencil and paper, tabletop, Dungeons and Dragons. They cover it and how it led to, you know, and influenced role-playing games and video games. They should have mentioned Gary Gygax, the co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons. I thought that would have been important, and on and on. But overall, as a series, I'm enjoying it. I like Trip Hawkins' interview, the Tom Kalinske interview. The interviews with Japanese developers and programmers have been enlightening. I thought that's been very interesting. I've really enjoyed the series, quirks and faults and all. I thought it has nice production, and I don't mind, you know, all the LGBTQ inclusion. I mean, that's fine, and that's where we are in 2020. For decades, so many of these people's stories haven't been told, and they didn't have a platform or the opportunity, or they felt, you know, they had to be in the closet. Well, welcome to 2020, where they're much more accepted, and I, you know, a documentary like High Score, I'm fine with seeing that. I think it's awesome. I think it's empowering, and I think it's important. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching. Tell me in the comments, is High Score too gay? Please be polite. Don't be bigoted. Just tell me what you think of High Score in general. What do you think of the series? And does the agenda of the series, as some of you call it, bother you? Are you perfectly fine with the direction that the series went? And what would you like to see in a possible season 2 of High Score? Hopefully that will happen. Maybe season 3 and on and on. That would be awesome. Thank you for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate it. We will talk to you guys later.